Hello and welcome to the second edition of our series of podcasts entitled Connecting the World of Railways, A Conversation With, brought to you by the International Union of Railways, the UIC. My name is Simon Fletcher, Director Europe at the UIC, and I'm delighted to be your host. As the UIC approaches the start of its centenary year, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for today, François Davenne, UIC's Director General. François, welcome to this podcast, and I'm delighted that we will have this opportunity to explore a number of targets that are part of the current UIC narrative as we explore the issues of sustainability, resilience, digitisation, and how the railways need to evolve over the first decade of the UIC's next 100 years.
Well, that's quite a challenging program, so I hope that we will be able to interest our listener into those quite difficult issues, I should say.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's a very challenging series of topics. The past 18 months or so have been an exceptionally challenging period for us all, and we had to enter into new ways of working and indeed organising ourselves. As a result, the UIC team were able to continue to deliver through working mainly from home. Now, what are the highlights that stand out for you?
That's a difficult question, but I think the main highlight for me is that we have been living a surprising event. Well, I think when the COVID-19 pandemic started, first we didn't realize what was happening. And then when the pandemic spread all over the globe, I think all the UIC staff and also our members were confronted with a lot of difficulties. And at first, we were worried whether or not we will be able first to deliver our program and also to keep the link with our members. And I think we have been learning collectively together. I should say for me it's some kind of paradox because we have been working with very new tools, those Zoom stuff and other Teams meetings that have been multiplying the last month. And for me, what is interesting is that first we realized, I would perhaps begin with that there is things that we could not do anymore. For instance, the direct contact is something you cannot replace. So all the direct contacts with our members have been quite difficult. Well, we made a lot of effort to remain coordinated, but indeed there is this lack of concrete exchanges. And in UIC, in the concrete day-to-day working, it has been the case. But what we also realized, that's a positive aspect, is that there is things that we can do that we cannot do before. For instance, in UIC, as we are a global organization with more than 200 railway undertakings all over the globe, it has always been very difficult to work on inter-regional projects and also to develop projects outside Europe more strongly. And during the pandemic, we realized that, in fact, it was easier to have those contacts with the other region, in particular Asia-Pacific, Middle East, and even the US. So that was the positive aspect. So globally, what I retain, I think it's our capability to adapt, our capability to be able to deliver our work program. And I think our members have noticed that. We have been obliged to be more transparent, more rigorous, and to really focus on the main added value within UIC.
You are listening to the UIC podcast, A Conversation with François Davenne, Director General UIC. The UIC is the global organisation that brings together a large number of railway stakeholders right around the world. François, in designing a future railway that is better for the end user, what kind of outputs can you share with us?
For instance, as I said, we have developed a whole program and a whole structure for having more global project, inter-regional project. We have been working very strongly on the definition of new ticketing feature like OSDM, open sale and distribution model, which is quite a performance because that's something which is about sharing ticketing aspects in all the networks, and that's always been something quite difficult to adapt to multimodality. And in fact, the COVID-19 has allowed to us to perhaps multiply contacts and to be able indeed to develop those new products. That's the same thing for 5G. We have been working a lot on 5G with FRMCS, Future Rail Mobile Communication System, and we had quite a lot of success. And I will finish perhaps in saying that during this difficult period, we have been obliged to be very reactive. That means that when the pandemic begins really to hamper the capacity of our members to really deliver services, at the end of the day, they succeeded to stay active. We launched very rapidly a COVID-19 task force, and we did it, I think, in 2 weeks, meaning that with the idea that came first from John Ridish Castelli, our chairman, and the realization, the first meeting of the COVID-19 task force, we took 2 weeks. And I think it was quite an exceptional performance of the organization. And that shows that there is a real commitment from all the UIC staff and from our members to do, mutualization of our knowledge, of our capacity to act. And for me, that's the main lesson of the crisis. We have maintained this capacity to work together.
And I think the concept of being able to rely on, or the delivery of the projects that rely on people to work together is something which has emerged, shall we say, from this, as a positive outcome.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it also showed to our community, because we are working together, once again, globally to develop those projects, that we could continue to work together despite we didn't meet together physically. And for some aspects, technical one mainly, because we are a technical organization. We are developing new products, digital platform for freight. I didn't speak about that yet, but we are developing, analysis paper, like paper on the new normals that we developed during this period. But what is important, more perhaps than the content of those papers, is that we had the capability to have all those experts working together to deliver new ideas. Well, those tools, those virtual tools, showed their efficiency for having experts together. I will take perhaps the last example of what we did during the period. We launched a new task force on sustainability, and we are working on the new narrative for what will be the rail industry in the next 10 years, because, we have quite a duty to deliver results for decarbonizing the transport world. And it was very efficient. And I remember having attended quite a few meetings of the task force, and it was really interesting to see the interaction between people from North America, Europe, Asia, in defining this narrative. And I think that's really a strength of our organization. And, we have been able to preserve that.
You and I both know, of course, François, that there are several reasons why the customers, the end user, shall we say, should be flocking to take the train for their journey. In addition to the narrative that you've just alluded to, how do you feel, or what do you think the railways should be proposing in order to change the behaviours of the customer, the end user, initiate a change in the transportation paradigm and bring the customer back to travelling on the railways again?
Well, I think that's exactly the key question that is ahead of us. And we have to keep to what the UN say about the SDG, and in particular for transport. There is a trilogy: avoid, shift, improve. Well, we need to have a really convincing narrative to be sure that we will be able to change the perception of rail among our customers. I think that's the main issue. Technically speaking, we all know that indeed rail is the most effective mode of transport in terms of ecology and possibility of actually decarbonize the transport chain. I think there is a key question that in UIC, and that's also something that we have been developing with John Luigi the past years, the fact that rail is definitely the most frugal mode of transport. In terms of energy, that's quite clear. We are 6 to 8 times more efficient than any other transport mode. That means that there is no possible, actually, competition for other mode in the next 15 years to rail in order to provide decarbonization. We are also frugal in terms of utilization of public space. In terms of life cycle of our rolling stock and infrastructure, we are not recasting iron every 5 years like the automotive industry or the truck industry is doing. And we are also scalable. That means that we can have a continuous improvement of our rolling stock and infrastructure. So those are the very good properties of rail. Those properties are known, but now we really need to demonstrate that we can become the backbone of mobility. Today, we are not. Clearly, when you look at the European level, we are 17% of the freight transport and about 9% of the passenger transport. We are not the backbone of mobility. In some countries, for some activities, for freight, for instance, we are indeed, rail can be the backbone of mobility. In Russia, for example, I think more than 55% of the freight traffic is by rail. That's more or less the same thing in the US. It's a little bit above in China. There is some countries with the modal share of rail, which is a little bit above 15 or 20% for passenger, but we need to progress. And The way that we will be able to progress is in providing a better service and also in having better interfaces with the other mode, like public transport, buses, metro, tram. And that's something we should be working very strongly in the next year. What we have to demonstrate is indeed that we can unleash our network capabilities. We have all the interfaces to people day-to-day life. We have the station, and the station are definitely the hub for mobility in the cities. We have the freight terminals. We have all the capacity to become this backbone. But we have to work together in order to have intelligent networks. We have still networks that are not clever enough. But the good news is that for doing so, there is tools, there is development that are almost finished, and we can, in the short term, being a very serious candidate for decarbonation. When you look to the period, what we need to do is indeed, and that's in all the documents, the one of the European Union and the one also from the UN, we have to be aware that basically we have 10 years to be serious about decarbonization. When you look to the last report of the IPCC, which is quite alarmist, you can see that if we don't curb the current trajectory, we are ahead of events that will completely change the climate, completely change our capacity to live on this planet. So we need to act fast. And one of the characteristics of the rail system and also linked to the public transport is that we can act fast. And what we have to do is to convince the political level and also our customers that they need to change their habits. And for that, we need to deliver a service that is good enough, that is flexible enough to have them back to railways.
So, François, you were talking about getting the customer back onto the train and making sure that we've got the whole framework right. How do you see that in relation to the cost of running railways? Everyone says that railways are expensive. How do we try and what is the battle that we have to make to do or to fight in order to try and be as cheap, shall we say, as the low-cost airlines?
Well, I don't think we will never be able to be as cheap as the low-cost airlines, but what will be important is that all transport modes pay their right share in terms of externalities. We have the externalities that are the weaker of all transport modes, and indeed, the low-cost airlines are only possible because airlines, basically, they don't pay their externalities. There is no tax on the fuel for the aviation industry since the very beginning. So we need to have something that will rebalance the external cost of the transport. That will be a precondition. And I think if you read all the literature that is around the Green Deal, the different reports that the European Environment Agency has issued, that's really a key question. And I think that we have seen with the EU Green Deal that Europe would be serious about having a level playing field for rail. So there is this question, and this question shall be addressed. I think that's one of the main drivers for having a competitive rail. But on the other hand, that's quite true that the implementation of a railway system is still quite expensive. And there, as I said, we have solution. First, we have solution to be more intelligent. That means that it will be easier to use the rail system. And well, that's also one of the drawbacks of our public transport systems. They are complicated. There is a lot of cumbersome formalities to enter into those networks. So we can make that easier for the customer. We can also increase the capacity of the existing infrastructure. And that is something that where UIC is very active. We are developing 5G for railways. That means that we will have a very serious telecommunication backbone for our different systems. And that the interconnection with public transport, with the interconnection with low emission mode like shared bike, taxis, and so far and so on, will be better organized. That means that it will be easier. It will be really more comfortable to use the rail system. I think we have to make a rail system desirable again. We have to make sure that for the customer, using the train will be flexible, will be comfortable, and will be affordable. And for the affordability, indeed, we have also the question of increasing the capacity since, well, railway, basically, we have enormous fixed cost, but if we can increase the capacity on the existing network, we will decrease the cost. So for that, we have quite a few new developments that will allow that. And for instance, there is ATO, automatic traffic operation. That means that if we have automated train, we will have more train on the same tracks. And then we will decrease the cost of using rail. Another interesting development will be to work deliberately on having new train, lighter train that will be less expensive destinations that today are quite difficult to serve. I'm speaking about the intercity trains for little or medium towns. If we combine ATO, lighter trains, more clever signalization system, meaning that more clever signaling systems that will be able to be cheaper to implement, we can decrease the cost of railway. So that's a system issue. We need to be serious. We need to demonstrate that indeed we can deliver this service, that we can give to our fellow citizens and to our cities these infrastructures that will serve their development goals. And for me, that's the most important. Well, the affordability, I'm quite optimistic that with the right development, we could increase the affordability of trains. But we have to change the mindset of people. And in a way, the crisis that we have lived with the COVID-19 has also showed to people that, in a way, it was important in the cities to live in a more frugal way. What you can see, for instance, in Paris, there is a lot of cycling lanes that didn't exist before. People are changing their way of thinking what should be their life. Should they be commuting every day? Should they take their car every time? That's changing. And I think we really need to be present and to explain how we can evolve into a desirable future. That's really what we want to do with this bold narrative for rail.
I'm just going to pick up again, if I may, François, on one of the points you just said, which is about changing the mindset. How do you see the role of the UIC in this communications exercise?
Well, I think the role of UIC is quite important because we are the only global association of railways in the world. And what is key there is that we are all having one voice on those questions. And that's quite difficult because there is a lot of national particularities for the different rail system. But on every country, there is a lot of very interesting experience, a lot of ideas. And well, UIC, its remit, it's to gather those ideas and to turn them into common ideas, common communication. And I think we are the only organization which is able to build this narrative. And I'm quite happy to see that, we had an initiative last year to have a new commitment from the railway globally to go to decarbonization, a new pledge. We had a new pledge. And what is important there, that's very railways. We had a pledge since almost 10 years, and we are ahead of schedule. That's quite interesting to say it because I think there is no other transport mode that can say, we had a plan for decarbonization and we are ahead of schedule. We have been better than expected. I think no one is able to say that. And we didn't communicate a lot about it. The new pledge is strengthening the commitment of the railway community. So that means that we are credible. And I think UIC can be the place where we communicate about it, where we can show to the UN, that we can show to the European Commission that, technically speaking, not in announcing some revolution in 2030, 2040, 2045. That's the figures that you have for the automotive industry or for the aviation, but that we can, in the next 5 or 10 years, being able to really make a difference. And I think we are credible. We are a sector that is perhaps not the most sexy sector in the world, but we are quite credible. People in the railways have the habit to deliver what they say they will deliver. And I think that's the main issue. We have to show this credibility. UIC is really the place where we can gather this credibility. And for instance, I'm quite happy to see that the Sustainability Task Force that we created 6 months ago now is gathering, basically the 5 continents. We have a conversation between North America, China, Russia, and, the narrative we are working on will be a global narrative and will be endorsed by the whole community and will be feasible.
And François, I think it's fair to say the pandemic has actually, to a certain extent, helped the railway community to formulate the discussions that you've just been referring to, because it's been much easier to have a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. And as a result of that, it's brought the railways a little closer together as a result of this proximity, but à distance, to use the French expression.
Well, indeed, the pandemic has helped because we have all adopted those new way of speaking together. You're perfectly right. But from my point of view, what is changing now, and more with the pandemic itself, and also the climate event that we have been registering, unfortunately, this summer, floods in Germany and Belgium, and those huge fire in Canada.
In Greece?
Yes, nobody cannot deny that there is climate change, that there is a global global warming. Nobody can deny that we will enter into a world where it will be increasingly difficult to predict what will happen. Because, well, the main message of the last IPCC report is basically that we are entering in an era of non-linearity. When we were projecting new railway lines, we just had to see, well, what happened the past 100 years. And we have the dimensioning, and we were quite sure that nobody will happen. Now it's not anymore the case. So the question about how to adapt to climate change, how to be resilient, how to actually do things in a relatively short period of time, that's something that we now are all aware. Well, I like to quote John Maynard Keynes that used to say in the London, we will be all dead, saying that in economics, we need to act fast. Well, this sentence has never been so true. If we don't act rapidly, indeed, we will have very severe problems. And, well, I do think that railways are indeed a very solid candidate to a rapid action. That's some kind of paradox. We have not the reputation to be a particularly dynamic sector. But on the other hand, we are extremely credible for having rapid results. What we need, and that's what we spoke about during this interview, is indeed a framework that will allow indeed that we enter into a massive shift to rail and public transport. But I think if the mindsets change, and I think there is objective conditions that will result into a change in the mindset of our fellow citizens, that is possible.
So looking at that framework that you've just described and looking forward from now, next year, 2022, will be the year of the UIC centenary, and you will have the honour of being its Director General during this momentous period. There are a number of mainstream events being planned next year as part of the centenary programme, with it all being kicked off by an international symposium on the 30th of November and the 1st of December in Paris. A core thread, and this is something that we've touched on throughout this discussion, a core thread of the event will be what railway transportation will need to look like in the next 5, 10 and 15 years, which is tomorrow, really. It's now. What is the picture that you can paint for our listeners? What might that panorama look like?
Well, that will be the object of the symposium, so I will not enter too much into the detail, but I will say two things. The first thing is that we will try to be absolutely realistic. That means that the technologies that we will speak about during this seminar are technologies that are next door, meaning that we can indeed have a very credible plan for the implementation. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the future that we will try to draw together, and because that will be a global event, we will not be only Europe, will be something that should rely on some political input, some change into the mindset, as I said previously. But basically, what will be the key issue, I think, if we want to change the transport paradigm, let's say in 10 years, meaning what could look like transport landscape in 10 years, we really need to go into new way of optimizing and combine the diverse transport mode. And I think that's exactly what digital tools will allow to do. Well, I think there have been a revolution, well, for booking hotels, indeed for the social media and so far and so on. But the transport networks, which are basically networks, so that means that, well, I'm a telecom engineer, so that's something that has always been quite astonishing for me, is that those transport networks are not thinking themselves as network, as telecommunication or IT networks. The transport networks are networks, but they are not thinking themselves as the telecommunication networks are thinking themselves. That means that they don't have the same level of flexibility. They don't use their internal information as efficiently as, for example, the internet or a different telecommunication network. And I think we are on the edge of a revolution concerning the way those networks are thinking themselves. Well, what we will try to demonstrate, well, we not enter into the detail, but first we don't have enough time, but what will be very important is that we retrieve all the information that we have within our networks to increase capacity, to increase the service to the customer, to increase the efficiency of the interfaces with the public networks, to be able to really have a network vision that will be seamless and that will include all the different transport modes. The idea will be to make as easy as to take the car, to take train, to take buses, to take bicycle, to take kick scooter, whatever, to walk perhaps also. All these different ways of mobility should be organized together, because the main challenge that we have is to spare energy. And sparing energy will be about optimization. And to end up with an optimization of the transport network, we should rely on programming, on network thinking, and all those questions, network thinking, programming transport, delivering information, that's things that we can do far better than we are doing today. Today, we have, basically a transport paradigm which is organized around the individual car. That's a reality, and for trucks, basically. What we need to do is to find a way to spare energy in optimizing the whole transport chain, whether it is multimodality for passenger or intermodality of the logistics chain for freight. And I think we have the tool for that. The other good news is that the mobility will not stop. All the studies show that indeed in the trilogy avoid, shift, improve, we can indeed curb a little bit the increase of the transport demand and of the transport offer, but the transport will continue to increase. So that means that all the sector, even the automotive sector or the truck sector, and I hope the railway sector, will have enough matter to grow and to deliver services. But what we need to do is to find new way of optimizing the logistics chain. And in a way, the good news is that the technologies are existing. There is other technologies that don't exist today. The hydrogen plane doesn't exist today and will only come in 2035 or 2040, and that will be too late, for example. But for reaching this objective to have a massive model shift to low emitting mode, well, we have the technology, we can have the political will. Well, that's a beginning in Europe, also in the US, and I think that's a momentum that we can feel here in UIC since we are a global organization. We are also speaking with our Russian and Chinese friends, and they are really keen to enter into this new era, and they are thinking very hard in order to find a feasible solution. And I think that would be the remit of UIC. We will start our centenary in trying to give the main tracks, the main credible tracks, to change our transport paradigm. I hope that it will be a success and we can gather quite a lot of people around these objectives.
It sounds to me like the whole agenda for the event in November and December is going to be fascinating, and let's hope that what we can do is to encourage the evolution, shall we say, of this message. François, we're almost out of time for this podcast, and what I'd like to do is to thank you very much for the clear image that you have provided and the perspectives that you have shown. And I encourage anybody who would like to hear more about these messages to join us on the 30th of November or the 1st of December for the symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and please keep an eye out for the announcement of the next podcast in this series, and a big thank you to the production team. And from us all here, goodbye.